There is a moment in every great artist's life where the mask comes off. Not the stage persona, not the carefully curated image built over years of training and performance, but the real, unfiltered person underneath all of it. For ParkJimin, that moment didn't happen on a stage. It didn't happen in a rehearsal room or a recording booth. It happened in a quiet studio in Seoul, sitting across from a Rolling Stone journalist on a mid-February afternoon in 2026, when Jimin said something that no one inside the BTS universe, not the fans, not the critics, not even perhaps his own bandmates, fully expected to hear. He was afraid. He had always been afraid. And for years, he had no idea whether that fear would ever go away. Now, with Arirang in the world and the biggest comeback in K-pop history still sending shockwaves through the global music industry, Jimin is finally talking about what it actually cost him to get here. And the story is more complicated, more vulnerable, and more human than anything the carefully managed world of K-pop usually allows its biggest stars to share. Let's start from the beginning, because to understand what Jimin confessed to Rolling Stone, you need to understand who he was before he became who he is now. When ParkJimin joined Big Hit Entertainment as a trainee, he was already behind. He was one of the last members to be added to the group that would become BTS, arriving with less training time than anyone else on the roster. While the other members had been refining their rap flows, their stage presence, their instinct for performance, Jimin was still catching up. He knew it. They knew it. And the gap felt enormous. What he told Rolling Stone confirms what ARMY has long suspected but never heard so plainly. Jimin debuted without feeling ready. He stood on that first stage, not with the confidence of someone who had earned their place, but with the quiet terror of someone who was not entirely sure they belonged there at all. "I still have my shortcomings," he told the magazine. And he said it not with the self-deprecating humility that stars often perform in interviews, but with the kind of honesty that sits differently in the room. He meant it. He has always meant it. This is the confession that no ARMY expected, not because it was shocking, but because it was so completely real. For years, fans have watched Jimin perform and felt something that went beyond technical admiration. There was always an edge to his artistry, a quality of total commitment that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than ambition. Now we know what that somewhere actually is. It is the feeling of a person who has never fully forgiven himself for the things he didn't know when he started, and who has been running, ever since debut, not just toward excellence, but away from the version of himself that he believed was not enough. That energy never left him. It followed him through every era of BTS. It followed him through the Love Yourself albums, through the Map of the Soul period, through the global explosion of Dynamite and Butter, and the English language era that made BTS a household name in living rooms far removed from Korea. It followed him when he finally released his solo debut, Face, in 2023. And it was still with him, in a different form, when he sat down in that studio in February and looked across at a journalist from the most iconic music publication in the world. But something had changed. And that change is the real heart of the story. When Jimin talked about making Face, his solo debut that crashed streaming records and reminded the entire music industry why this man is considered one of the most gifted performers of his generation, he did not describe it as a triumph. He described it as a classroom. He described it as the place where he finally learned something about himself that years of BTS success had not been able to teach him, that he was capable of making creative decisions without someone holding his hand, that his instincts were real, that the voice the other BTS members had been encouraging since his trainee days was actually, genuinely, something worth believing in. "I think I learned to be less afraid with my songwriting," he told Rolling Stone. And then he said something that reveals exactly how much the solo era meant to him beyond any chart position or streaming milestone. "Thanks to that experience, when I got to work on this new group album, not that I did a great job or anything, but I wasn't afraid to ask questions, and I did my best to keep trying." Read that again. Not that I did a great job or anything. This is Jimin talking about his contribution to Arirang, one of the most critically acclaimed and commercially explosive K-pop albums in history. An album that sold 641,000 copies in the United States alone in its first week. An album that topped Apple Music charts in 115 countries. An album that has been called, by multiple serious music publications, a genuine artistic statement rather than just a commercial product. And when Jimin describes his own role in making it, his instinct is still to qualify, to soften, to protect himself with self-deprecation before anyone else can criticize him first. This is not false modesty. This is a pattern. And Rolling Stone, to its credit, sat with that pattern long enough to let Jimin actually talk about it, rather than simply moving on to the next talking point. Because what Jimin describes when he talks about his drive to improve is not the healthy ambition of an artist who loves their craft. It is something more complicated. It is the ambition of someone who has tied their entire sense of worth to the standard they perform at, and who has never, not even at the heights of global superstardom, felt entirely safe to stop reaching. Everyone has the desire to do well, and I have that as well, he told Rolling Stone. So, to let go of that desire feels to me like wanting to quit altogether. So I don't know if I'll be able to let go. That sentence is one of the most honest things any member of BTS has ever said in a mainstream Western publication. Because what Jimin is describing is not passion. What he is describing is the inability to separate his identity from his output. The feeling that if he stops striving, not just working hard, but striving in that particular anxious, relentless way, then something essential about him would disappear. That the desire itself, even when it exhausts him, is also the thing that tells him he still exists as an artist. ARMY has always felt this about Jimin without being able to articulate it. It is why his performances land differently than almost anyone else's. When he dances, you are not watching someone execute choreography. You are watching someone who has staked something real on every count of the music. When he sings, there is a quality in his voice, especially in the upper register, especially in the moments where the note stretches beyond what is technically comfortable, that communicates something like urgency. Like he is singing towards something he has not reached yet. Like every performance is both a proof of concept and a reminder of everything he still wants to be. That is not an accident. That is ParkJimin, exactly as he described himself to Rolling Stone. But this interview also revealed something newer, something that the solo era and the military and the process of making Arirang have genuinely shifted in him. Because while the fear has not gone away, the relationship to it has changed. When Jimin talked about the origins of They Don't Know About Us, the track from Arirang that has taken on a life of its own with ARMY, the song that musicians and singers around the world have been praising with an enthusiasm that is almost without precedent in contemporary pop music, he described a creative process rooted not in anxiety, but in something he actually wanted to say. Something he had a clear feeling about and pursued with intention. The initial wording was actually, "You make me weak," he revealed. Because that's what I wanted to tell the fans. You shape us. You always treat us like we're such amazing people. But because of that, we don't have room for growth. I wanted to try expressing that feeling that they might be making us weak. This is a profound creative statement. In a landscape where K-pop artists are expected to celebrate their fandoms without complication, where the relationship between idol and audience is carefully managed to feel warm and unconditional, Jimin wrote a song that engages with the actual complexity of that relationship. The idea that love, even sincere, generous, beautifully intentioned love, can also be a form of pressure. That being treated as extraordinary can become its own kind of cage. That ARMY, in all of its devotion, is not just a source of strength for BTS, but also a mirror that the members must constantly perform themselves into. This is not a critique of ARMY. Read it carefully, and it is actually the opposite. It is one of the most intimate things Jimin has ever communicated to the people who follow him. It is the acknowledgement that the relationship is real enough and complicated enough to have actual weight. That he does not experience their love as a simple, frictionless thing, but as something he carries. Something that has shaped him in ways that are not always comfortable. The fact that the song exists on Arirang, that it made the final cut, that Jimin pushed for it, that it became one of the most discussed tracks on the album, tells you something important about where he is as an artist right now. He is not making music to manage perceptions. He is making music to say something true. And perhaps nothing speaks to that shift more clearly than what happened in the Arirang recording sessions themselves. Jimin described those sessions to Rolling Stone in a way that is almost cinematic in its intensity. "We operated kind of like a factory," he said. "Each producer would occupy one of 4 recording booths, and we would divide ourselves into groups of 2 or 3. We switched around daily, working with one producer all day, and then someone else the next. That went on every day for almost 2 months. We made over 100 songs working together with that process. 100 songs. For 8 weeks, every single day, BTS worked through a rotation of producers and ideas and sounds, building something enormous, and then filtering it down to the 14 tracks that would become Arirang. And Jimin, the member who had always felt like he arrived late, like he was still catching up, was in every room. Contributing, asking questions, not afraid. Pause on that image for a moment. For recording booths running simultaneously, producers cycling in and out, members splitting and regrouping, day after day, trying combinations and sounds and ideas that may never see the light of day. Over 100 songs born in that factory, and only 14 survived. 14 out of 100. That is the ratio of what the world hears to what actually happened. And it means that for every song on Arirang that made you feel something, there are roughly 7 others sitting in an archive somewhere that the world will probably never know. Songs that Jimin sang in a booth in Seoul on a Wednesday afternoon, trying something, pushing something, not being afraid. That is the Arirang that no one gets to hear. And in some ways, knowing it exists makes the album that did come out feel even heavier. Because what reached us is not the result of inspiration. It is the result of relentless, industrial, systematic creative labor by 7 people who took the raw material of their experience, the military, the absence, the fear, the reunion, and processed it through 100 drafts until something true emerged. The solo era gave him something he had been searching for since debut: evidence. Actual, documented, streaming chart evidence that his instincts were worth trusting. That the things he heard in his head, the emotions he wanted to communicate through music, were things other people could hear and feel and respond to. And his biggest vocal influences? In the Rolling Stone interview, he gave an answer that will stay with ARMY for a long time. I think the BTS members might have been my biggest influence, he said, because they've been hearing my voice all the way back since I was a trainee. They're the ones who told me I have a great voice and recommended songs for me to sing. Those recommendations have been very influential for me. This is not a political answer. This is not Jimin deflecting to be polite. This is a man telling the truth about where his confidence actually came from. Not from external validation, not from chart positions, not from Rolling Stone covers, but from 6 people who sat in a practice room with him before any of this existed and said, "Your voice is real. Your voice is good. Trust it." That is what BTS actually is, underneath all the commerce and the spectacle and the global phenomenon. It is 7 people who built each other into something none of them could have become alone. And then came the military. Because no conversation about Jimin in 2026 is complete without acknowledging what those months actually meant. When Jimin described leaving the military to Rolling Stone, he chose his words with the care of someone who has spent a long time trying to find language for an experience that resists language. "It was such a strange feeling," he said. "I thought I would just be happy, but it's not as simple as that. It's hard to put it into words. I thought about everything I experienced in the military. I thought about the friends I trained with, and the officers as well. Then I wondered if this means I can be on stage again. All of these disparate thoughts hit me all at once, so it's tough to describe what I felt." He did not say relief. He did not say joy. He said strange. He said complicated. He said all of these disparate thoughts hit me all at once. Because Jimin had spent months inside a structure completely unlike anything the entertainment industry had prepared him for. A structure that did not care about his vocal range or his stage presence or the number of streams his music had accumulated. A structure that asked different things of him: discipline of a different kind, community of a different kind, identity of a different kind. And when he walked out of that structure and back into a world that was waiting for ParkJimin the idol, the gap between who he had become and who the world expected him to be was not nothing. The fact that Arirang exists, that all 7 members came back from those separate, difficult experiences and made something this cohesive, this ambitious, this emotionally honest, is not a small thing. It is the result of people who had been broken down and rebuilt, choosing, deliberately, to build something together rather than apart. Jimin's confession to Rolling Stone is not a single dramatic revelation. It is not a scandal or a breakdown or a moment of crisis. It is quieter than that and more lasting. It is the story of an artist who spent a decade not trusting himself, who finally found enough evidence to begin, who is still afraid but is making music anyway, who still qualifies his own contributions in interviews, but shows up fully in the work itself. ARMY always knew something true was happening inside Jimin's performances. Now they know what it actually sounds like when he puts it into words. And here's perhaps the most important thing he said in the entire interview. The line that Rolling Stone used in their promotion of the video, the line that has been circulating on social media ever since the piece dropped. "My teammates are all so amazing, so I feel the need to improve my worth as a fellow member. Not to outperform them, not to compete with them, to be worth them, to be someone they can stand next to and feel proud of. To earn, every single day, the right to call himself one of the 7. Consider what that sentence actually means when you trace it back to where Jimin started. He arrived as a trainee with less time and less preparation than anyone else. He debuted feeling behind. He spent years in the most successful K-pop group in history, convinced that the gap between him and his bandmates had not fully closed. And now, in 2026, with a solo debut that broke records and a group album that the entire world is talking about, he still returns to the same place. Not to pride, not to a rival, to the question of whether he is worthy of the people next to him. This is not a failure of self-esteem. You cannot watch Jimin perform Arirang material, cannot watch his free dance at Goyang, cannot watch the precision of his movement during the Arirang World Tour, and conclude that you are looking at a man who does not know his own value. What you are looking at is something more specific and more interesting than that. A man whose standards for himself have grown in direct proportion to his talent, so that the distance between where he is and where he wants to be has never actually shrunk. The better he gets, the more clearly he can see everything he is not yet. In any other context, that might sound like a problem to solve. In the context of artistry, it is the engine itself. Think about what BTS has asked of Jimin across all of these years. In the early days, it asked him to keep up. During the Love Yourself era, it asked him to channel personal pain into something universal. During the Map of the Soul period, it asked him to explore shadow and depth alongside musicians who were rapidly becoming among the most studied in popular music. During the English language era, it asked him to perform authenticity in a language that was not his own, for audiences who were still learning how to understand him. And through all of it, through every conceptual shift and commercial pivot and artistic reinvention, Jimin's job was the same. Show up completely, leave nothing in reserve, make every performance feel like it might be the last one. He did that, every time. And then he went back to practice and tried to figure out what he had done wrong. This is the Jimin that Rolling Stone finally got on record in February 2026. Not the icon, not the cover star, not the performer whose free dance at Goyang had ARMY convinced they were witnessing something genuinely historic. The person underneath all of that, the one who still hears his own debut and wonders whether he was ready, the one who sat in 4 recording booths for 2 months, making over 100 songs and still qualifies the experience as, not that I did a great job or anything. And yet the song exists. They Don't Know About Us exists. The Arirang album exists. The World Tour exists. Jimin's entire career is built on the gap between how he sees himself and what he actually produces. And that gap, rather than closing, has become the source material for music that connects with people in a way that no amount of strategic brand management could manufacture. Because when you hear something true, you know it. ARMY has always known it with Jimin. They have always been able to tell, even through the choreography and the styling and the production and everything else that surrounds a K-pop performance, that what they were actually watching was a person. A real one. Someone who cared about this so much that the caring was visible in every breath. The Rolling Stone interview gave that feeling a voice. It put language to something that has been communicated through movement and melody for over a decade. And the most remarkable part of watching that video, of seeing Jimin sit in that chair and talk to Brian Hyatt with the calm of someone who has finally stopped trying to manage the story, is that he does not seem relieved. He does not seem like a person who has been carrying a secret and is now free of it. He seems like a person who has simply arrived at a place where honesty costs less than it used to, where the gap between what he thinks privately and what he says publicly has narrowed to something he can live with. That is growth, not the dramatic kind that gets written about in think pieces. The quieter kind that shows up in small details, in the fact that he uses the word afraid plainly, without cushioning it with humor or deflection. In the fact that he credits his bandmates as his biggest vocal influence, and means it literally, not metaphorically. in the fact that he can describe leaving the military as strange, rather than reaching for the more comfortable, more expected word. Happy. The Jimin who sat across from Rolling Stone in February 2026 is not a different person from the trainee who debuted feeling behind. He is the same person, further along. Still running, still reaching, still convinced that the next version of himself is the one that will finally be enough. But running now with the knowledge that the running itself, the not stopping, the not giving up, the returning to the booth every day even when the previous day felt insufficient, is not a symptom of something wrong with him. It is the whole point. There is a reason that Jimin, of all the BTS members, was the one who first proposed going back into the studio as soon as the Arirang World Tour ends. Not to rest, not to consolidate what they have built, to make more. Because for Jimin, the alternative, the space where there is no project, no new standard to reach for, no new version of himself to try to become, is more frightening than any stage has ever been. So, to let go of that desire feels to me like wanting to quit altogether, he told Rolling Stone. And there it is, finally, the full shape of who ParkJimin is. Not just a performer, not just a member of the biggest band in the world. A person for whom making music is not a career but a form of staying alive, artistically, emotionally, maybe in some way he has never quite been able to put into words. That is ParkJimin in 2026. That is the confession that no ARMY expected. Not because it was surprising, but because hearing it said plainly, in his own words, in one of the most read music publications in the world, makes something click into place that was always there but never quite articulated. The fear was never weakness. The fear was the price of caring this much. And if Arirang is what ParkJimin sounds like when he decides to stop letting the fear win, then the music he makes when he finally, fully, completely lets it go might be the most extraordinary thing any of us have ever heard.